Legacy of Kamikaze Pilots and Their Humanity. The kamikaze story has a complex legacy in modern Japan. At the Chiran Peace Museum in southern Kyushu, thousands of letters, photographs, and personal effects of kamikaze pilots are preserved. The museum stands near the airfield from which many took off on their final missions. Museum director Mutsuo Kuwahara explains, "We don't glorify their deaths or promote militarism. We simply want to show who these young men really were, their thoughts, their dreams, their humanity. Only by understanding them as individuals can we truly grasp the tragedy of war." Among the most poignant artifacts are the pilot's final letters. Lieutenant Toshio Anazawa wrote to his wife, "When I think of you, I want to hold you tight and cry. Please forgive my selfishness in leaving you behind. From the afterlife, I will be your guardian angel." At Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, kamikaze pilots are venerated along with Japan's other war dead. This remains politically controversial as the shrine also honors convicted war criminals. For some Japanese, especially on the political right, the kamikaze represent the pinnacle of patriotic sacrifice. For others, they symbolize the dangers of militarism and blind obedience. This tension reflects Japan's broader struggle with its wartime past. Each year, groups of elderly veterans and nationalists commemorate special attack forces at ceremonies across Japan. Simultaneously, Japan's post-war pacifist movement points to the kamikaze phenomenon as evidence of how militarism exploits youthful idealism. Perhaps the most nuanced perspective comes from historian Emiko Onuki-Tierney, who spent years studying the diaries of student kamikaze pilots. She suggests that rather than seeing them as either brainwashed zealots or perfect patriots, we should recognize them as individuals caught between personal desire to live and societal pressure to die, a universal human dilemma magnified by extreme circumstances. The kamikaze story also resonates with Americans, though often in different ways. For many American veterans who faced these attacks, the kamikaze remains symbols of an alien enemy willing to embrace tactics unthinkable in Western military tradition. Yet as time has passed, many of these same veterans have sought to understand their former enemies better. In 2002, a remarkable meeting took place when Saburo Sakai, a Japanese pilot who had trained kamikaze forces, met with American sailors who had survived kamikaze attacks. One American veteran, Jack Morley, recalled, "I hated them for years, but now I see they were just kids following orders like we were." This evolution in understanding reflects how the passage of time can transform bitter enemies into fellow humans with shared experiences of suffering. The meeting ended with former adversaries embracing their shared humanity transcending the divisions of war. The kamikaze phenomenon has taken on new significance in recent decades, as suicide tactics have emerged in different conflicts around the world. Military historians debate whether modern suicide bombers should be compared to kamikaze pilots. There are both similarities and critical differences. Unlike modern terrorist tactics, kamikaze attacks targeted military rather than civilian targets, operated within a conventional war framework, and were employed by a nation-state rather than non-state actors. Yet the psychological and cultural dimensions, how societies can make self-destruction seem meaningful, may offer relevant insights. Dr. Robert Pape, a political scientist who studies suicide tactics, notes, "What kamikaze pilots and modern suicide bombers share is not primarily religion or culture, but strategic logic. They are weapons of the weak against the strong, employed when conventional tactics have failed." This perspective challenges us to look beyond cultural stereotypes to understand how strategic desperation can drive extreme tactics. It also reminds us that while we may condemn such tactics, dismissing them as merely irrational prevents understanding their true origins and contexts. What's striking about the kamikaze phenomenon is how it reveals the malleability of human nature. The same educational system that produced poets, philosophers, and scientists also produced young men willing to fly to their deaths. The diaries show that many maintained their intellectual curiosity and humanity even while preparing to die. Sasaki Hachiro, a student-turned-pilot, wrote just days before his death, "I have read the Greek philosophers and the German idealists. I have studied differential equations and celestial mechanics, and yet here I am, about to die with so many questions unanswered." There is something profoundly moving about these educated young men trying to reconcile their intellectual training with their military duties, reading Kant one day and practicing crash dives the next. Their diaries reveal minds struggling to maintain humanity in inhuman circumstances. Their story challenges simplistic narratives about wartime Japan. While militaristic education and social pressure undoubtedly shaped their choices, many maintained critical faculties and emotional complexity despite these pressures. They were neither mindless automatons nor perfect patriots, but human beings with doubts, fears, and hopes. The kamikaze phenomenon also reveals how organizations can systematically overcome natural human survival instincts. The elaborate rituals, group pressure, and ideological framing didn't eliminate fear of death, but made acceptance of death socially mandatory. This organizational aspect, how military systems transform individuals, deserves careful study. In 1945, American occupation authorities banned all discussion of kamikaze operations, considering them potential inspiration for resistance. When this ban was lifted in the 1950s, a flood of memoirs, novels, and films appeared, often romanticizing the kamikaze. The most famous, The Eternal Zero, became a best-selling novel and blockbuster film, though critics accused it of glorifying self-sacrifice. The controversy reveals how the kamikaze remain politically charged in modern Japan. For conservatives seeking to revise Japan's pacifist constitution, they represent noble sacrifice. For progressives, they symbolize how militarism exploits youth. Both perspectives simplify a complex phenomenon. Beyond politics lies the human story, of young men facing impossible choices, of families left to grieve, of a nation grappling with defeat. At the Chirin Peace Museum, visitors can see thousands of photos of smiling young pilots, their faces frozen in time. These images humanize statistics, reminding us that each kamikaze was an individual with a unique story. One such story belongs to Fuji Hayashi, age 22 when he died. His final letter reads, "Dear Mother, I trust this finds you well. Don't worry about me. I will do my duty. But I confess I'm a bit afraid, not of dying itself, but of the pain. I wonder if it will hurt very much, and for how long. Please take care of my goldfish." This mixture of brave front, honest vulnerability, and mundane concern about a pet goldfish captures the humanity behind the myth. He was someone's son, worried about causing his mother pain, and concerned about a small creature dependent on him. Similar humanity appears in the diary of Nakao Takanori. "Today I received 6 letters from home. Reading them at night in my bed made me cry. I don't want to die. I want to see my family again. But everyone is watching me now that I'm assigned to the Special Attack Corps. I must appear brave." The psychology of the kamikaze pilot remains relevant because it touches on universal human questions. How do we face mortality? What makes sacrifice meaningful? How do societies shape individual choices? What responsibilities do we have to country, family, and self when these come into conflict? For Japanese youth today, the kamikaze story offers cautionary lessons about blind obedience and how systems can exploit idealism. Many Japanese schools now take students to the Chirin Peace Museum specifically to reflect on these issues. The educational approach has shifted from either glorification or condemnation to thoughtful examination. For Americans, the Kamikaze story challenges assumptions about our former enemy. Rather than the fanatical caricatures of wartime propaganda, we find complex individuals not so different from American youth of the same era. Young men who loved, feared, dreamed, and ultimately died in a war they had little hand in creating. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Kamikaze is how their story complicates our understanding of choice and coercion, of heroism and exploitation. Their letters and diaries reveal young men who often recognized the futility of their sacrifice, even while embracing it, a paradox that defies simple categorization as either brainwashed victims or willing martyrs. They existed in the gray area between these extremes, making choices under constraints we can barely imagine today. Understanding this complexity is crucial for understanding war itself, not as an abstraction of competing ideologies, but as a human phenomenon that places impossible burdens on individuals. As we view footage of kamikaze aircraft plunging toward ships, it's easy to focus on the spectacular moment of impact. But the true story lies in the minutes, hours, and days before. In the mind of the young pilot as he wrote his final letters, said goodbye to comrades, and confronted his fears. In those private moments recorded in diaries never meant for public consumption, we find not the propaganda image of fearless warriors, but young men much like those on the ships they targeted, scared, homesick, and dreaming of peace. One pilot, Araki Haruo, wrote, "The cherry blossoms are falling now just as we will fall. But cherry blossoms return each spring. When this war ends, I hope Japan blooms again with peace." The historical irony is profound. Japan did indeed bloom again after the war, transforming from a militaristic empire to a peaceful democracy and economic powerhouse. But this transformation came too late for thousands of kamikaze pilots who might have contributed to that future had they lived. Their fate raises uncomfortable questions about collective responsibility. The generals and admirals who ordered kamikaze attacks mostly survived the war. Emperor Hirohito, in whose name they died, remained on the throne until 1989. It was the youngest and most vulnerable members of society who paid the ultimate price. This dynamic of older leaders sacrificing younger generations appears throughout military history. But the kamikaze phenomenon made this sacrifice explicit, systematized, and celebrated, raising ethical questions that resonate beyond Japan or World War II. When societies glorify sacrifice without questioning its necessity, when patriotism becomes a tool for silencing dissent, when young people are taught that their highest purpose is to die for the state, these are warning signs that transcend any single culture or era. The most profound legacy of the kamikaze may be this warning about how societies can normalize the abnormal, make the extreme seem reasonable, and transform bright young minds into weapons. Their story reminds us to question authority, to value individual life, and to recognize how social pressure can overcome even the most basic instinct for survival. In the words of kamikaze survivor Irokawa Daikichi, who later became a prominent historian, "I don't want anyone to forget that the Special Attack Forces were a product of a militaristic education system and social pressure that made dissent impossible. Before we talk about their spirit, we must acknowledge the system that created them." Today, at the Chiran Peace Museum, visitors can see the transformed runway from which many kamikaze pilots took off on their final missions. Now planted with cherry trees, it blooms each spring in a cycle of renewal that the pilots themselves never lived to see. As one survivor, Nakajima Tadashi, reflected decades after the war, "We were told we were dying for the future of Japan. In a way, perhaps we did. Not by killing Americans, but by becoming a terrible lesson in the consequences of militarism. If Japan never follows that path again, perhaps our lost comrades did not die entirely in vain." The kamikaze story is not simply about how men die, but about how societies can make death seem meaningful, for better or worse. It's about the human capacity to find purpose even in tragedy, to maintain dignity in the face of manipulation, and to preserve humanity even when circumstances conspire to strip it away. In the end, perhaps the most important thing we can do is simply listen to their own words, not filtered through propaganda or stereotype, but in all their messy, contradictory humanity. In doing so, we honor not the act of dying, but the struggle to remain human in the face of death. As one pilot wrote in his final letter, "I am not dying for an abstract idea or golden future I'll never see. I am dying for the world I have known and loved, my family, my hometown, the cherry trees on the riverbank where I played as a child. If that makes me a tool of militarism, so be it. But know that my heart holds love, not hatred, as I go to meet my fate." In these words, we find not the dehumanized enemy of wartime imagination, but a mirror reflecting our own most human hopes and fears. Perhaps that recognition of shared humanity across the battle lines is the most valuable lesson these young men left behind. Thank you for watching this documentary on the untold story of Japan's Kamikaze Pilots. If you enjoyed this exploration of Japanese history, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. We'll be bringing you more in-depth looks at fascinating aspects of Japanese culture and history in future videos. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you found most surprising about the real story behind the Kamikaze. Until next time, sayonara.